Hello, my name is Michael Seminara, and I'm the curator of the Historical Collection at the Institute of the History of Medicine. Welcome back to the Institute, where today, in our rare book room, we'll be taking a look at some of the highlights of our anatomy collection. Anatomy has always been a strength within the historical collection, as some of the earliest gifts were books on the subject. Today, we'll offer a brief overview of 7 titles of significance in anatomy, illustration, and publishing in 16th and 17th century Europe. First is the Isagogi Breves of Berengario Da Carpi. This book, as the title suggests, is a short introduction or guidebook meant for students or practitioners who require an understanding of anatomy. Berengario studied and taught at the University of Bologna, where he began printing on anatomy around 1518 with a book on the fractures of the skull. His second book was an illustrated commentary on Mondino de Luzzi, whom we'll talk about next. This book here is his third book, printed in 1523. The book is significant for many reasons. It presents new and original anatomy at a time when taught anatomy largely focused on Galen. Berengario is thought to have dissected hundreds of cadavers, thus basing his work on first-hand observational knowledge, and in some instances, challenging Galen. His books were heavily illustrated, and these illustrations would influence future books on anatomy. This particular edition was printed in Bologna at the Hectorus Press in 1523. This is the second edition and includes added illustrations of the heart. We don't know for certain who created the woodcuts, but it's been suggested that Berengario was heavily involved in their development. The woodcuts in Isagogi are the same used in the earlier Mondino commentary. This book consists of 80 leaves and 23 woodcuts with typographical borders. Aside the images, we see marginal text. As is sometimes seen within copies of this book, a previous owner had trimmed the pages too closely, and some of the marginal text is lost. Also in the margins, you see a number of printed manicules. Manicules are these little hands meant to point out important sections of text. They are holdouts from earlier manuscript traditions. The images themselves, such as the full figures walking through scenic landscapes, are somewhat similar to what Vesalius would produce 20 years later. Here we have the Anatomia Mondini. This is not the commentary that Berengario had published in Bologna, but the 1541 edition printed in Marburg. Mondino was working in the 14th century at Bologna, and this work would have been written around 1316. Known as the restorer of anatomy, Mondino either practiced or observed dissections and is said to have influenced Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical work. He's called a restorer because he brought dissection into the classroom, likely performing a dissection in the presence of students in 1315. He differs from Berengario in that he's less concerned with correcting errors in Galen. His book on anatomy was widely used in medical education from the time it was written till around the mid-16th century. The book mostly survives in later printed editions, like this one here. Early manuscript editions of Mondino were not illustrated. After the publication of Mondino's commentary in Bologna, Johann Dryander set out to make this edition in Marburg. We see 46 woodcut illustrations throughout, most of which are full page. A portion of the illustrations were inspired by Berengario, but many are original to the work, and likely drawn from Dryander's own dissections. I have both the Berengario and the Mondino here open to the illustration of the heart. While the presentations are different, you'll notice these are both 3-chambered hearts. Like Berengario, Dryander was a professor of anatomy, and he would have produced this book as a teaching aid for students. Our copy here has been thoroughly annotated, likely by a student. Next, we'll look at De Dissectione of Charles Estienne. As the title suggests, this book was meant to be a dissection as well as an anatomy guide. We know the book was intended to be printed earlier than it was, with most sections complete by 1539, but delays in production and a possible plagiarism dispute led to the print date of 1545, 2 years after Vesalius's De Fabrica. Estienne came from a family of printers. His father established a printing shop in Paris in 1502. His brothers worked in that shop, and Charles would become manager in 1550. For some reason, Charles decided not to print the dissection guide at his brother's shop, and instead it was printed by his stepfather. Estienne was a physician, having received his degree in medicine in 1542. For the production of this book, he partnered with a surgeon who assisted in both the dissections and the drawings that would inspire the woodcuts. These woodcuts were engraved by a few engravers during the production period. One of those engravers we know to be Francois Yolat, as he signed and dated his work, which is somewhat unusual, as engravers' signatures don't always make it to print. The majority of the woodcuts in this book contain no signatures. If you look at these 2 illustrations, you'll see his name and the dates 1530 and 1531. That date of 1530 does indicate quite a long timeline for the production of this book. Some of the later woodcuts are particularly interesting, as we see a series of full figures with only a small portion of relevant anatomy. Often, these portions appear to be inserted into existing woodcuts, as we can see the outline of where a smaller block was placed onto a larger block. The theory for why this might be is that these are recycled illustrations, meant to be utilized for other non-anatomy printing projects either before or after the book's publication. The way the text in these images are often set within a frame further indicates that these woodcuts had other uses. All three of the books we've just discussed come to us from the library of Howard Kelly. Now, of course, we can't talk about illustrated anatomy without mentioning Vesalius. Here we have one of our first editions of the 1543 De Fabrica. This particular copy was purchased by William Osler, who gifted it to his successor, Llewellyn Barker, who in turn gave it to us. Osler was a known collector of Vesalius, having gifted copies of the first edition to many libraries. Osler had at least 6 of these in his possession at one point. Born in Brussels, Vesalius studied medicine at Paris before moving to the University of Padua in 1537 or 1538 to take up the position of professor of surgery and anatomy. He seemed almost immediately interested in producing a groundbreaking work of anatomy that would be both the most scientifically advanced and artistically accomplished book on the subject to date. Well aware of the inaccuracies caused by Galen's reliance on animal dissections, Vesalius centers human dissection from the very start of the book. Here we see in the frontispiece the author performing a dissection amongst a crowd of onlookers, his own hands on the cadaver. The beginnings of this book can be traced back to his publications of 6 tables of anatomy in Venice in 1538. Stephen van Calcar is cited as the artist for these drawings and likely the engravings. The preparation of De Fabrica, with its more than 250 illustrations, would take time to produce. Vesalius is known to have kept a close eye on the engravers producing these plates in order to ensure absolute accuracy. It likely wasn't until 1542 that all of the illustrations for De Fabrica were complete, with Vesalius shipping the plates in text to Basel to be printed at the Operinus press. Further showing Vesalius's intentionality behind the design, a letter was sent to Operinus requesting that the printer follow the proofs exactly and stating that Vesalius himself planned to be in Basel for the duration of the printing. This letter was printed in the preface of the book. There was also an understanding that shortly after the printing of De Fabrica, Operinus would print the Epitome, a larger, condensed version of the book meant for students with some illustrations designed to be cut and assembled into flaps. Because they were meant to be used by students, the Epitome would become exceptionally rare. Our German Epitome might be one of only 30 known to have survived. Moving onward to the 17th century, we're now looking at Pietro Berrettini's Tables of Anatomy. Technically, this is an 18th century book, having been first printed in Rome in 1741, but it's actually a late printing of a book that was prepared much earlier. Berrettini was an Italian Baroque artist, mostly known for his painting and architectural work. In 1618, at around the age of 20, he was commissioned to produce a series of illustrations for an atlas of anatomy. We don't know who commissioned the work, as the book never materialized, but these drawings, clearly done during dissection, were engraved into copper plates by Luca Ciambrellano, likely that same year. These copper plates and the drawings were lost for some time after their production. It wasn't until 1741 that the surgeon Petrioli compiled and added descriptions for printing. It's likely that only the first 20 plates represent Berrettini's work. The plates were slightly altered before printing. I have the book open to the 4th plate, where we see a large figure drawn by Berrettini and the LC emblem of the engraver here, all dating from between 1618 and 1620. These smaller figures and the lettering throughout were added shortly before publication. These plates were intended to be used by physicians, but they are incredibly dramatic in style, further demonstrating what a capable artist can do for the subject. Little is known about the printer. Here is Bidlew's Anatomia Humani Corporis, printed in Amsterdam in 1685 as a large folio with 105 copperplate illustrations. This work introduces new elements of realism to anatomy. None of the figures in this book appear to be walking through fields or posing heroically. Instead, we see detailed images of what cadavers would actually look like during dissection. These copper plates were engraved from drawings from Gerard de Laris, who would go on to produce his most well-known painting shortly after. This was likely the largest atlas of anatomy produced since Vesalius, but unfortunately, the book didn't sell. Some suggest that it was priced too high or that the accompanying text wasn't comprehensive enough. It was also incredibly expensive to print. This led to the sale of the plates to William Cooper, who would go on to reprint them in 1698. This upset Bidlew, who produced a pamphlet in 1700 to publicly accuse Cooper of plagiarism. Cooper responded with his own pamphlet in 1701. The two books are similar. Even the title pages are identical except for the text. Cooper added a few extra plates and some more detailed explanation of the Bidloo plates. Bidloo would spend the rest of his career as professor of anatomy and medicine at the University of Leiden. Plate 30 here is one of the most striking of the atlas. I'll finish on something a little bit different. This here is the 1675 translation of Remmelin's famous flap anatomy book. Remmelin's book was printed in 1614 in Germany and was a success even a few years earlier, with plates moving within the market before the official print date. Remmelin was a physician and an anatomist who calls himself the inventor of the anatomy flap book, even though we have examples of earlier flap books. This here is the Moxon printing. Joseph Moxon was an English printer and fellow of the Royal Society, who's most noted for being the first to produce a printer's manual. Translated from the Latin by physician John Ireton, the book is very similar to the original. On the title page, we see an example of Moxon's type design and a note informing potential buyers that the book is useful for all doctors, surgeons, statuaries, painters, etc. There are only 3 pages to the work: a man and a woman, a man, and then a woman. These pages are very similar to those of Remmelin's, except that a few religious phrases have been omitted. There are fewer layers than the original as well. The interior structures are attached to a separate sheet underneath the top image, allowing the users to move deeper into the book as they dissect deeper into the body. Here's what it looks like to dissect a flap. So we see the man and the woman, and if you were to peel behind layer by layer, this is what it would look like. That's it for the books. Thanks for joining me, and please stick around to ask questions. Hello, and welcome again. I'm happy to be joining you for the Q&A portion of our broadcast. Joining me is Donna Hesson, Public Health Informationist at the Welch Medical Library. She's going to help with the question queue. So please type your questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can.
The first question I see on the chat is Cindy was intrigued by the swapped-in section that showed the skull anatomy. She asked, are there really no non-anatomy versions of these prints that might give us an idea of what they might have been made to depict?
Yeah, so great question, Cindy. And actually, no, not to my knowledge. It's kind of what makes this book such a fun book to show people, is because it does represent this kind of printing mystery, as we know that those plates, those woodcuts, were meant for other publications, but I've never seen them, and as far as I can tell, no one has definitively linked them to other works. So no, we really have no idea where else they would have been printed. And the thing about wood blocks is they can be somewhat fragile, so they could have easily been destroyed some time ago.
Good question. Now, Alice asked, these have to be the most beautiful textbooks ever made. Do we know if Osler, Kelly, and or others in that time collected these only for their artistic value, or did they see academic scientific value in them even after hundreds of years?
That's a great question. So we know a little bit more about Osler's philosophy for collecting, and he collected a lot of Vesalius, and he was interested in Vesalius because of Vesalius's influence in medicine. So he saw Vesalius as sort of the beginning of modern medicine, and he did see Vesalius as someone that modern physicians could learn from. Kelly's collection of books do tend to be a lot more beautiful to look at. So I would imagine that he was purposely trying to collect books that had artistic value.
Another question came in, and that's Amanda has asked, do students or faculty from the School of Medicine ever use these books in their classes or research? Or is it mostly historians who are interested?
Thanks for asking that. So yes, absolutely. I see regularly, actually, students from within the School of Medicine who are interested in medical history. Often I see them as groups. Maybe they're new fellows that are coming in for a rotation or new residents. And I present them usually with a sort of a tailored grouping of books that are related to their subject specialty. And it's a good sort of grounding in the modern work that they'll be doing here in the School of Medicine, and also sort of allows them to look back and see how medicine was built before them. So yeah, actually, you do see a good bit of medical students in here.
One question I wanted to ask was what makes anatomy such an important part of the historical collection?
It's another great question. So the beginnings of the historical collection at the Institute really start around 1929, and the four founding faculty here were all collectors of rare books, and mostly they collect it in books in their subject specialty, but all of them also collect anatomy. And it could be that anatomy books were something that they were all drawn to because of the visual appeal, but regardless, it's sort of caused anatomy to be the core sort of basis of that early collecting here at the Institute. And because we've always had that core group of anatomy texts, we've been able to sort of build on it. So we've really become a great, large collection of historical anatomies.
What do these books collectively tell us about the development of medical knowledge in early modern Europe?
That's a good question. So the reason why I selected these particular books is they sort of follow this tradition in which we start seeing physicians use firsthand knowledge in the production of books, right? So we're watching this shift between physicians who are not doing dissections and are basing their research on earlier writings, and physicians who are doing dissections and making new discoveries. So this particular time period is filled with physicians doing research and actually making firsthand discoveries and wanting to publish them.
Now, William has asked, the flap book was so inventive. Do we know if artists and doctors of the time also made three-dimensional models to study from as well?
Yeah, so I would imagine yes, actually. I mean, the flat book is particularly useful for anatomy, right? Because it allows access to the interworkings of the body when you don't always have access to an actual cadaver, right? To do the dissections. But I would imagine that it would be useful for just about anybody who's trying to do any sort of modeling. And in fact, in the Moxon book, we see in the very first page, he's calling it as useful for statuaries and artists, right? He wants artists to use this book. And I would be surprised if that didn't lead to other publishers making books for artists using that same technology.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Are there any conservation challenges unique to anatomy books, especially those with flaps or foldouts?
So yeah, well, most of our books we follow the sort of preventative maintenance model here, right? So we try to make sure that they stay intact. We're very careful not opening them too wide because we don't want the spine to be damaged. We're very careful with the pages. We only handle them with clean hands, and we keep them in climate controlled locations. All of these, so all these books we've seen actually they live in our book vaults. Um, but the flat book in particular is fragile, and ours is in really good shape considering how old it
Yeah.
is, right? So it's a 17th century book, and it's been used, and all of the flaps are there. None of the individual flaps have actually been torn out, and the way that we maintain it is just a very careful use. So hopefully, it doesn't need any conservation work in the future, as long as we are careful with it.
What does the Bidlew Cooper controversy reveal about authorship and intellectual property in early modern publishing?
So this whole episode was really kind of interesting, right? So Bidlew's book didn't sell, and because he didn't sell, the publishers had to make some of that money back. So they sold the engravings to Cooper, and it was a legitimate sale, right? So there was really quite a bit of a debate here. So Bidlew was convinced that Cooper was plagiarizing him. And the real reason for that is likely because we don't see a acknowledgement on the title page, right? But Bidlew is acknowledged in later pages in the book. So Cooper is not it's definitely not trying to take ownership of this work. He does acknowledge Bidlew and the engraver. He just doesn't do it in a way that we would generally accept as right to do today.
Well, Cindy has another question. Are there books in the collection that are from outside the European school? Are there anatomy books from Eastern medicine at the Welch Library? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
actually. So we collect broadly here, and we actually have a really great collection right now. If you stop by the Welch Library, you'll see our Japanese book exhibit up. Um, Howard Kelly was a great collector of Japanese books, and we've also had faculty throughout the years collect in Chinese medicine. So we have a pretty extensive collection.
Well, Winston's asked, where do you go for assistance with conservation?
It's a great question. And right now, we don't really go anywhere for conservation work. There is a team of conservators over at the Sheridan Libraries. And if I was to need some help with a particular book, I would definitely ask them to take a look at it. But so far, we've been careful enough with our books that we haven't had to make that request.
Amanda has asked, if you could speak a little about the general scope of the history of medicine collection. Do you collect contemporary works as well, or are you focused on a certain period in medical history?
So a historical collection really does collect broadly.
Mhm.
So, we collect history globally, and we collect history up into modern times, right? So a lot of the core collection, a lot of the stuff that we received early on as an institute tends to be older, right? Because that's where people were collecting in that area. But I'm constantly buying for this collection. I'm buying 20th century, 19th century, even 21st century history. So if it is of historical significance, I'll consider it for the collection.
What is one detail in these books that viewers might miss at first glance, but is especially important?
So for all of these books, they're meant to be used, right? So whenever I work with a student who's handling a rare book, I like to point out all the evidence of usership. So we can see in, I think, almost every book that we talked about today, there's some signs of them being used. So we see
Mhm.
notes in the margins, we see underlined passages, and all of this tells us what particular portions of the book were useful to the readers, and what may still be useful to readers today, right? So that history of readership is a very important aspect when you're handling rare books, but also it really does just tell you a lot about how these books are perceived. I will say though that the Baratini, she got no markings throughout, and that book was almost certainly meant to be a book to illustrate the beautiful plates.
Just one more question. What do these books reveal about changing ideas of the human body in early modern Europe?
So early modern Europe was definitely a time where the perspectives on the human body changed, and a lot of that is due to dissection. So Vesalius, in his work, on focused on creating a body of work that could be used to train physicians, but also to dispute some of Galen's findings.
Mhm.
And in doing that, he was able to sort of get this next generation of physician anatomists ready to start producing their own works and their own findings. And even just at the University of Padua, after he left, we see all of his successors making contributions to anatomy in this way.
Let's see. Another question from Winston. What is your most important recent acquisition? Do you maintain a list and have regular contact with potential collection donors?
That's a great question. So um, we do maintain a list and we do keep contact with donors, but I don't actually have a newsletter, and that's something that I'm thinking about getting started to keep everybody up to date and sort of what's happening with our collections. Most recently, I've been working on purchasing, and actually, if we're talking about modern stuff, I just got a really great collection of documents and photographs from an AIDS clinic in Cuba in the early 1990s. So not a rare book. It's a manuscript collection, but it's something I think is going to be tremendously useful for researchers.
And where do you go to get these types of books?
Mm. So basically from all over, right? So booksellers who specialize in medical rare books, um, but also from catalogs, from in-person events. So recently this summer I was at a conference and I was chatting with a bookseller who had the first account of electroacupuncture printed in France. And it's a really beautiful book. So it's on acupuncture and it's in French and it's meant for a French audience, but it uses all of the sort of the traditional Japanese style techniques for illustration. Uh, and it's just a wonderful book, and it's definitely going to be used for people studying sort of the influence on Eastern medicine in the West.
Is that a current, or was that 20th century or
So that was 19th century.
19th century? Oh, cool. Greg asked, Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man has become popular art over the centuries. Do you think Da Vinci may have received inspiration from any of the books that you have discussed today?
That's a great question. So it is suspected actually that there was some sort of relationship between Mondino and Da Vinci, right? They were both working in Italy, and definitely, if you look particularly at the Windsor portfolio of the Da Vinci work, he had access to cadavers. He must have had access to cadavers and able to do those detailed illustrations that he did. So he was working with an anatomist, and likely that anatomist just giving the time frame, or he was working on sketches that were supplied by Mondino that would have been a little dated at that time.
Raphael has asked, do you agree with Osler that the Fabrica was the most influential book, the most pivotal to the development of modern science-based medicine? Interesting question.
It is an interesting question,
Very
and
interesting.
and so we all know that Osler was just a massive fan of Vesalius,
Hmm.
right? And I'm not sure if I agree, right? Because Vesalius was really working on an earlier tradition of anatomy through investigation, right? That was already established in Italy. So he was definitely well aware that there were other anatomists that were doing these types of work, and he was building on that work. And yes, their books weren't as extensive as his books, but they really did sort of lay out that early investigative mode to anatomy that he's building on and that future anatomists built on.
Alice has asked, do you think there's a role for this kind of illustration today in the age of photos and digital models?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are definitely certain aspects of anatomy that can't be photographed, right? And if you think about the work, all of the great work that's being done over at the Department of Art as Applied to Medicine here, they're the medical illustrators here on campus, and they do illustrations of surgeries and operating rooms, right? Areas where you can't always get a camera to illustrate properly, maybe because there's blood or something that's sort of occluding what you're trying to look at. And this is where the hand drawings and sometimes the graphic illustrations can really come in handy, really show things that a camera can't.
How common was it for anatomical illustrations to be reused or adapted across different publications?
Pretty common, actually. So especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, you've got to think that for bookmaking, obviously the most expensive aspect is the paper, but then you have to consider the labor of actually producing the artwork. So very often you'd see very similar illustrations throughout books. Why reinvent the wheel, right? If someone's already created an illustration that shows exactly the point that you're trying to get across in your book, you'll hire a engraver to either re-engrave it for your book, or maybe you'll find those woodcuts.
Hmm. Any other questions? Well, it looks like that was the last question we have time for, so we will wrap it up here. Thanks again, Michael, for taking us into some of the milestones in human anatomy illustration that we have in the historical collection at the Institute of the History of Medicine. For more information about the Welch Medical Library, visit welch.jhmi.edu. I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in to listen to our conversation today. For more information and to register for future virtual programming, visit hopkinsathome.jhu.edu. Thank you again, and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.